Welcome to Viking.TV from Highclere again. It's a beautiful weather in July at the moment, and I'm delighted to welcome you back to Highclere. And fun enough, where I thought I'd start is outside, and I thought I'd share some stories of some remarkable trees with you. And I'm starting so appropriately with the ash tree. In Norse or Viking mythology, this ash tree, the ash tree was the world tree. It was the tree under which the gods sat to hold all their counsels of wisdom, and I think that might still be useful today. This is a beautiful red ash tree with, as you'd expect, some wonderful colours in the autumn. The beautiful colours in the spring as well. And it sits in a woodland not amongst other ash trees, which is probably what's saving it at the moment, because in this country we're suffering from ash dieback, and sadly we have lost hundreds of ash trees just here at Highclere. This ash tree, however, is doing really well. It's got this wonderful straight trunk. The wood has so many uses, from archers' bows in the past to blocks for cutting and shaping and making furniture. It's even good for firewood. It is really a tree of life, which again goes back to the sacred tree of the mythology. Virgil, in his Eclogues, regarded as one of the most exquisite trees in the entire world. And they live for a long time, much longer than beech, for example. They have been honoured, admired, and held in awe, and perhaps that's a signal that we should do the same today. So where's it planted? Well, I'm standing just to the southwest of the castle, and there's this massive cow parsley around me. This is a wood which was planted by my parents-in-law. It's called Penelope's wood, in honour of my father-in-law, sister Penelope. And it's got some cedars, the ash tree, some beech, some rowan, some sorbus. We've actually thinned it out a little bit to allow the trees that are left to grow really well, and they are growing really well, and they provide these amazing shaded woodland walks for us all to enjoy throughout the year. I'm looking forward to welcoming some of you to walk this with me. Trees are such an important backdrop to all of our lives. They provide us with so much, and they're also beautiful in their own right. The second Earl of Carnarvon planted many of the trees in this area. He wanted to create not just the best British native trees, but some exotic trees as well. So there are tulip trees, there's a huge copper beech which is more unusual behind, and the inevitable cedar trees. He was also the Earl of Carnarvon who was really interested in azaleas. And across the lawns here, he created an American garden, and he bred some azalea altoclarenses, which were hybrids, which he then exported and shared and gave to many people around the world. This is a very special part of the garden. There's an extraordinary walnut tree, and then there's a smaller offshoot of that very same walnut tree amongst the azaleas, which we've just let grow. Every single year I try to collect walnuts, and every single year the squirrels beat me to it, but perhaps they need it more than I do. But nevertheless, the structure of a walnut tree and the shade produce such a lovely contrast to the cedars on the lawns here. The cedars of Lebanon, one of which I'm standing under, must be one of the most iconic trees associated with the castle, or as you watch Downton Abbey. They are extraordinary trees venerated by civilizations, from the Greeks to the Egyptians to the Romans. At Highclere, they grow enormously strongly and well. In their native Lebanon, because they're constrained by less water, they don't grow as big. And in some ways, because they grow so big here, they're then subject to perhaps the stresses of the winds and the vagaries of the British weather. The cones from which the first cedars of Lebanon were grown here came back with Richard Pocock from the Lebanon in about 1748. He went on travels round Lebanon, and he picked up some cones And I'm just looking for some now and I can't see any. I've got the wings of some cones here. And he brought them back and he pulled out the seeds and they were grown. They were firstly grown in seed beds for the first 20 years before they were planted out. So this one dates back and would have seen the French Revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte, Queen Victoria's time, Edwardian time, and the sinking of the Titanic when Downton Abbey started. It has survived 2 world wars, and now it's surviving and giving a shelter, shade, and inspiration as we all make our way through the challenges of this current time. We have a huge collection of cedars now, and we keep on planting them. There's 4 types of cedar amongst the collection of cedars. This is a Cedrus libani, cedar of Lebanon. There's also a Cedrus deodara, which is the cedar of God. So Geordie and I have planted 2 of them. And I think the birds like the cedars as well. And then there's a smaller, there's a Cedrus atlantica, which is the bluier leaves, and another one which I cannot remember, I'm going to be honest, and we don't grow it here. But these are the large, spectacular trees. Hilariously, this is also called Lady Mary's Bones. So many scenes in Downton Abbey were set under a tree. And I think you remember it for the characters, but you also remember where the scene happened and the sense of place that this tree gives you and gives all of us here amongst the lawns. So these are amazing trees, and I thank God that Geordie's ancestors planted them nearly 250 years ago. We've planted so many trees here at Highclere, and such a diversity over them. Over my shoulder is another ash tree. There's horse chestnut. That's the cutleaf beech there, which is going to be such a beautiful tree. There's an older yew, which has probably existed there for some time behind me. And an evergreen ilex right at the back, which offers shelter for all the birds throughout the year. To add to that, we've also planted trees like quince trees, orchard trees, because again, the diversity gives much more support to all the wildlife here. And I think it helps us find moments of peace as we walk and talk to friends, or do talk to the trees as well. It's a good thing to do. One of my most favourite glades in the woods at Highclere. These are all copper beeches, and as they come out in spring, there's this vibrancy and to their leaves, which are a mixture of pale green and lime tinged with copper, and then they turn this phenomenal copper colour. And of course, in the autumn, they then pick up the reds and the ochres, and the effect is spectacular. Beech is really known as the queen of the woods. They grow together. Can you see there's a whole group of them here, and they're much happier planted in a group. So like here, they're always best planted, in this case, a sort of circular cluster of them. I think they were planted by Geordie's ancestor, Robert Herbert, and he lived at Highclere from about 1720 until he died in about 1769. He saw the accession of 3 kings, George the First, Second, and Third, and he created a walking naturalistic landscape with glades and temples in which he could sit and admire this extraordinary landscape in Arcadia in which he lived. So these trees, I think, are a sort of temple, but a living temple to Robert Herbert. Underneath them, not a huge amount grows. So if you do plant a graded beech, don't expect to grow much underneath them. But they have their own quietude and place in the woods. The lands here at Highclere are chalk, and beech grows very well on chalk downland. However, they are not nearly as long-lived as ash or cedar or oak. And as you might be able to see, there's some ferns growing out of some of the trunks further up. And I'm not sure, they may well, I hope, last another 20 or 30 years. But up here, does it really matter for when they fall? Because there aren't any people walking by. And if they do fall and become trees on the ground and old trees descending back into the earth, they give such a, they're so hospitable to so many insects, so many beetles, and thus so many birds. So we're high above the castle, and this is in itself a really special place. This lime avenue always gives me such a sense of peace. It is a haven for so many insects. If you look up, or if I look up, I can see so many insects flying around amongst the leaves. And above this little tentative sky of blue, which is just beautiful as the light filters down between the leaves. I suspect this avenue was planted about 200 or 300 years ago. The tree trunks are quite thick and quite broad. One of the insects which particularly likes it is the bee, and we keep hives of bees here at Highclere, where she sells the honey in the gift shop. But honey collected from these lime trees is always particularly delicious and treasured. It bends round at the top, and I think you wonder where it's going, and it goes a little bit longer as a lime avenue. And then the other side of me is the castle. To one side we've got this Arcadian parkland, and I think you can hear all the sheep. They've been shorn recently, so they look a little bit more naked, but I'm sure they're very glad of it for the summer sun. And the other side of Lime Avenue is the Wood of Goodwill. Lime trees, like every tree, has been with mankind for centuries, and they all have their own legends. It was thought to be a tree which provoked good deliberation, and we still have the word subtilia in legal jargon today about how you deliver your edict. There are, of course, some very famous lime avenues, the Lindenstrasse in Berlin, and there's other lime tree avenues in many other capital cities. They grow well and they share their space with us, and they offer so much shade, so much beauty, and so much peace in all of our busy lives. So I hope at some point you might come and share this walk. It's one of my favourites, whether to walk along it or sometimes I might bicycle. And it's a lovely place to ride a horse. It settles the horse, so hopefully you return still on top of the horse. Anyway, this morning it has been a wonderful avenue to share with all of you. My walk amongst the trees at Highclere had, of course, to include the oak tree. No tree is perhaps more associated with England than an oak tree. The wood has helped build ships as well as cathedrals, homes, and it's part of our veritable DNA. Actually, in terms of nature and wildlife, it's also incredibly important. No tree supports such a broad diversity of wildlife, nature and insects as the oak tree. What's so extraordinary about this oak tree is how old it is. It is not old because it's tall and enormous. It's old because of this extraordinary width of trunk round the base here. I mean, I think it certainly was here in the time of Queen Elizabeth I. It might even be a little bit older than that. During times of stress and when it has its own challenges, it retrenches. So at the top, it pulls back from the topmost branches. It doesn't worry about them. It pulls back into the central part of the tree. And it hollows itself out to again use the minerals to support itself as best it can for the essential survival in life. And the oak trees which do survive all these hundreds of years tend to be on their own. not in the midst of a wood, but on their own, so they don't have the competition and they can survive the challenges. And that's what this tree has clearly done. You can see I love all the deeply grooved, fissured bark. It is just a tree in which I'm sure fairies live, as well as all the different insects. And in the center, there's quite a few hollows, so you could not quite go in there. It's not quite that old or venerable yet. But there are oak trees which do completely hollow out. The leaves are a huge, rich source of humus in the autumn as well. So every part of this tree is so supportive of not just us, we always tend to put it in our terms, but also supportive of wildlife. It's one of the later trees to open and show its leaves in the spring and the summer, but when it does, it's magical. And in the autumn, they turn this extraordinary shade of yellows and ochres, and they just light up these park fields. They are incredibly special. And I've shown you this tree because it's one of my most favorite trees. In pursuit of some extraordinary trees, we've travelled to different areas of Highclere's park, and now we're on the north side of it. Behind the camera is Oxford, and you're looking at the castle, and then the hill to the south, Sidon Hill, with Heaven's Gate on the top. And in the field behind me, you've got such an arcadia of sheep kindly eating the grass. There are lawnmowers. And equally well, you've got these beautiful folds in the hillsides of the valley. They weren't natural, they were man-made. So that was part of the work of Capability Brown. He was a foremost British landscape architect of the 18th century. And his work and plans were drawn up here for Geordie's ancestor, the first Earl of Carnarvon, in 1771. It's an extraordinary plan, about 10 foot long, which hangs on a wall inside the castle. The trees were planted with tremendous care. They were moved and repositioned in order to give the best effect. And if you think where we're standing is the bottom tail of a Y going up to the castle, giving you a view up there, and the top of the Y to the west was planted with the darker, greener trees, so that as the sun sets, they give the most fantastic shadows. And to the east, the tree planting was predominantly lime and beech, the lighter leaved coloured trees, and we've seen some of those on this journey this afternoon. It is an extraordinarily beautiful place to live, and it's very interesting to contemplate the mixture of nature and of nurture, how much has been achieved by man and what was there to start with. So Highclere is a very special place, starting from the medieval deer parks through to the Capability Brown and through to what we look after today and how we decide what we're going to replace, replant, and what is left as it is. We're now going to go up to Heaven's Gate and we'll look at the castle from a different point of view. Well, where else better to come and find somewhere to answer your kind questions than at Heaven's Gate on a tree-studded hill with the most fabulous view of the castle behind me. And you're looking north towards the hills, the other side of which is the town of Oxford. It is a wonderful view at all times of year. Now, I know there have been quite a few questions sent in already about all the trees. So would you like to kindly ask me the first question, Paul? Make them easy.
Okay. We have got Lizzie from Ohio, and she has asked, how many native trees are there in England?
Well, you're very kind, Lizzie. In fact, there's only 38 native British trees. It's arguable whether the beech is or is not a native British tree, so it's not a huge range. And actually, we've planted each of the 38 native British trees in our Wood of Goodwill, which just lies as one part of the gardens to the south of the castle. I thought it was fun to see what they do comprise of. And they're not hugely decorative or hugely exotic, obviously. But many of the trees in this country are so exotic, like the cedars of Lebanon or the tulip trees. And they've been brought back to this country by so many enthusiastic collectors. And the British have been enthusiastic botanists, particularly in the 18th and 19th century. So what's the next question, Paula?
So Doris from Idaho says, she's asked two questions, if that's okay. What is so special about native trees? And do you have any American trees?
Well, thank you, Doris. I mean, I think the native British tree is simply defined about what was here before the last ice age. So that's not for me to define or anything else. And I think my knowledge is still quite sparse on it. But I've been writing a book about seasons at Highclere. So I have been researching many of the trees that have grown here. So my head is still in that space. And I hope, Doris, you'll really enjoy looking at the book that I've written as well. It's only partly about trees, but the trees give us the breath of life, don't they? So what American trees do we have here? Well, we do have a red oak, which I think is strictly speaking, is an American tree. We have quite a few American shrubs. Wellingtonia, of course. We have some huge Wellingtonia, which above all grow to the most spectacular and enormous historic size in California. Ours are much more recent, but they're still inspiring trees with their columns going upwards. But I think they're going to take a few more hundred years before they get anywhere near the ones in California.
We've got Betsy from Wyoming says, what trees do you recommend planting in a small garden?
Well, Betsy, in Wyoming, I think your trees are going to be very different to what we can grow over here. I know the climate is quite hot and cold with long times of snow, long seasons of snow. If I suppose I can talk best about what we grow in this country in smaller gardens. And I think if you're planting trees, it's really lovely to have trees which you can eat, so orchard trees. So I think, unusual trees, a damson and a quince tree and an apple tree and a pear tree, and you need to make sure you've got one or two which fertilise each other or get the ones which self-fertilise. But it's fun to buy different ones. The quince is a really charming tree, but so is the crabapple, and the shape of the apples from the crabapple are really rather wonderful. So depends what you like eating as well, and they'll give you blossom in the spring and fruits in the autumn, and they won't hopefully overtake your garden, which is also a positive part.
We've got Emma from Nova Scotia says, can you tell me about the Canadian tree which was gifted to you?
Thank you, Emma. Yes, you're quite right. On the east lawns outside the castle, there's a Canadian maple tree. And this tree was kindly given to us to celebrate and commemorate the 150th creation of the Dominion of Canada, because the 4th Earl of Carnarvon played quite a large part in it. So it was given to us by the Canadian High Commissioner, and it was wonderful. They all came down on John A. Macdonald's birthday on January the 11th, just after the year of commemoration, and we planted the tree, and it's growing really well. It's a beautiful tree which is going to have wonderful red leaves. It's begun already to develop some strength and thickness. It's got a beautiful plaque to commemorate the collaboration, partnership and association between Canada and Highclere. So for those who don't know so much about this, it was the 4th Earl of Carnarvon who hosted the Canadians and encouraged them to come to both England and Highclere, and he helped take the bill to create the Dominion of Canada through the Houses of Parliament in January of 1967. So it was, and many of the founding fathers have come and stayed at Highclere. So thank you, Canada and founding fathers, for the gift of a tree.
Sarah from Windsor asks, what is the amazing purple tree?
With Sarah, there are various amazing purple trees. One round the back of the gardens, which you might have seen in various videos we've done, is actually a huge copper beech, which is absolutely enormous, but sadly coming to the end of its life. And there's actually another tree which my father-in-law planted, which has got huge purple trumpet flowers at this time of year, which I think is called something like a Paulonia or something. So Paula, a very suitable tree for you to plant, obviously, but it looks amazing. It's got long purple trumpet leaves, but flowers, but no leaves at this time of year. So it's just amazing looking at the diversity, the colours of everything else that exists here in these gardens, and I'm sure for all of you at home. And I'm looking forward to the tulip trees. We've got quite a few magnificent tulip trees, so called because of the shape of the leaves, and they should offer us some white flowers later on. I'm excited about that.
Jane from Swindon asks, do you have any elm trees at Highclere?
Jane, the saddest thing is that rather like we're suffering from ash dieback now, the elm trees were also wiped out by Dutch elm disease. I don't really remember them. They were such a staple part of the English landscape, and nearly all the paintings by constables, the famous paintings of the English countryside, elms featured large in them, and they have entirely gone. We've actually been gifted some elm trees which we hope might be disease resistant by Natural England to plant and to try. So we will try to do that, and it's going to take another generation before they get to the size of the past trees which so defined the English roads and the English parks. It's amazing when you think of, I suppose, what we've lost, but perhaps that's always happened, but I hope we're more conscious of it at the moment.
Alice from New York says, what interesting fact can you tell me about the native trees?
Alice, I'm not really sure that I have much more to add about the native British trees. There's crab apples, oaks, beech I would include in it. There's black poplar and trembling aspen, some of which you might actually think also belonged in North America, because trees populated have spread across the whole of this world, and they grow in greater strength depending on the climate and also where they were populated as some of the land masses split apart. My husband is a geographer. I'm just a sort of historian and sort of English student, so I'm going to lead that to others. I suspect we're coming to the end of the questions. Yeah. I think we're running out of time, but I cannot thank you enough for joining me today. And tomorrow I am down on the farm, so please come and meet our pigs and our chickens, and we'll see if we can find some lambs, and we might even meet the horses, and perhaps Muffet the Shetland pony. So I'm looking very much forward to seeing you tomorrow.